Good morning, 6th grade. Yesterday I gave you guys a pretty difficult order of operations worksheet that was dealing with fractions. And the reason why I gave you that is because you needed also some practice with fractions, even though I know you guys really dislike it. So you should know the order of operations by now because you've been watching the videos, but I'm going to go over a couple of the questions with you and some that are like it so that you can find some success in the questions that you did have. So yesterday, one of your questions was 5/6 plus 3/4 divided by 3/5 squared. Okay, so when you are doing your order of operations, the very first thing you have to do is parentheses. Well, we have something in parentheses, but is there any operation there? Yeah, there is. The operation that's there is division, but since we're dealing with fractions, we're going to leave it in fraction form instead of dividing it out and getting 0.6, because then you would have to, when you square that, you would have to make it 0.36, and that would be annoying. So we don't want to deal with that. So instead, we're going to leave it as it is. So we've done the parentheses. Now we need the exponents. Here we have our exponents. We have to find the 3/5 squared. So I'm going to rewrite this as 5/6 plus 3 divided by 4, or 3/4, sorry, divided by 3/5 times 3/5. So when you are multiplying fractions, you multiply straight across. So our new equation is 5/6 plus 3/4 divided by 9 over 25. So we multiply across, multiply across. What's the next operation that you're going to do? Are you going to add or divide? Well, here we have, you multiply or divide. So we're going to divide first. Whenever we divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. So we take 5/6, and if you remember, the reciprocal just means that we are switching the numerator and the denominator. 3/4 times 25 over 9. Do we need to find a common denominator when we're multiplying fractions? Absolutely not. We don't need to find a common denominator when we're dividing or when we're multiplying. The only time you have to find a common denominator is when you're left with adding or subtracting. So we multiply straight across the top. 25 times 3 is 75. We know this because we're Americans and we have quarters. And when you multiply by, it's really easy for us to multiply by 25 because of our American currency. And then we take 4 times 9, and you get 36. My daughter thinks that that's hilarious. Okay, that's what this part equals. So now we are just left with 5/6, which I'm going to move this up to the top because you can't really see it on the screen, plus 75 over 36. We are left with our very last operation. So we take 5/6 plus 75 over 36. What do you have to have in order to add these together? We have to have a common denominator. So I have to find a multiple that these two have in common. That's why we practiced earlier this year how to find the least common multiple. Because if you can find the least common multiple, then you don't have to multiply these two together to try to figure out what a common denominator could be. So I know that 6 times 6 equals 36, so I'm going to multiply the denominator and the numerator by 6 because we want to create equivalent fractions. So I have 30 over 6, 30 over 36 plus 75 over 36. And when we add or subtract fractions, you only add and subtract the numerator. You leave the denominator alone. Otherwise, we wouldn't find a common denominator. So we have 36, and then on top we have 105. Now you're going to ask, Mrs. Rader, do I have to change this to a mixed number? No, you don't. You know that I really dislike mixed numbers with a passion. I just wish people would leave them as improper fractions, so just leave it as it is. If you want to change that to 2 and 34, 36, or 33, 36, I don't know how much it would be, you can, but you don't need to. So that was the first question. I'm only going to do one more of these. I'm going to do the last one. 5/6 minus 1/3 squared times 1/2. Because that one you do have the parentheses and an exponent and multiplication and subtraction. So let's do that one. God bless you, child. Bless you. Oh my goodness. Get your act together. Okay. So we have 5/6 in parentheses minus 1/3 squared times 1/2. Okay, so the very first, well, I'm very close to the camera, apologies. The very first thing that you need to do is find the common, we need to do the parentheses. Inside the parentheses, though, you're going to say, okay, Mrs. Rader, I'm going to do the parentheses. I'm going to take 5/6 minus 1/3, but you can't do that yet because inside of the parentheses, there's an exponent. And before we can subtract inside of the parentheses, we have to use the exponents because exponents come before the subtraction. Whatever. Okay, so when we square this, it doesn't mean multiply by 2. It means we take 1/3 times 1/3. So I now have 5/6 minus 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/2. The reason this needs to be in parentheses, if I took this out of the parentheses, it means that I have to multiply this by this, and then subtract it from this. And that would give us a completely different answer than what we'll get in a little bit. So now we have 5/6. We have subtraction and multiplication. Multiplication comes before subtraction. So I multiply these together, multiply across. 1 times 1 is 1. And 3 times 3 is 9. So we get that. If the negative sign were inside of this 1/3, then you would take negative 1/3 times negative 1/3, and then you would have plus 1/9, but that's not how this is. So we're leaving it as minus 1/9 times 1/2. Are we finished with the parentheses? No. So we still need to work in here. We need to subtract. The first rule of subtraction, besides making sure that they're in improper fractions, is finding a common denominator. Do. You good? Okay. When I find the least common multiple of these two, I take out a 3, I get a 2 and a 3. Multiply these 3 together, and you get 18. So I can multiply by 3, multiply by 3, multiply by 2, multiply by 2. I get 15/18 minus 2/18. Notice that we have a common denominator. We only subtract across the top, so we get 13/18. If we were to subtract these, we would get 0 in the denominator, and that is an imaginary number. You cannot take an amount of something and divide it into 0 groups. You can't. That's why some cultures don't even have a number for 0, because it represents nothingness, and you can't take something and divide it amongst nothing. Divide it into nothingness. Like, you can't do it. So that would be imaginary. Can't do it. Keep the 18 the same. We multiply by 1/2. When we multiply, once again, we multiply straight across. So I take 13 times 1. That gives me 13. Take 18 times 2, and that gives me 36. And that, my friends, is my final answer, is 13/36. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I promised you that I would keep this short. That is 2 questions. I think that covers almost everything that you would need to do. There's one question on here that has 1/2 cubed. And so you, instead of just taking 1/2 times 1/2, please don't take it 1/2 times 3. That's going to give you the wrong answer. You take 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2. And then multiply straight across. And some of you are going to say 2 times 2 times 2 is 6. It is not. I'm telling you, it's not 6. I'm not going to tell you the answer, but I am going to tell you what the answer is not. You are not going to have 1/6 as your answer. You are not going to have 3/6 as your answer. If you get that as your answer, you're wrong. Figure out what you did, what mistake you made, and fix it. Okay, so until I see you guys again next time, you guys have a wonderful Wednesday, and don't do anything I wouldn't do. Enjoy the rain. Get outside maybe, and with your parents' permission, and jump in some puddles. And I will talk to y'all later. Bye!